The New York Jets have a lot of off-season intrigue this offseason, right? Do they trade for Deshaun Watson? Do they draft Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, or Trey Lance? Who do they sign in free agency? And Jack and I, we're going to give you what we think the Jets' dream offseason looks like. So for me, no doubt about it, we trade for Deshaun Watson, trade that second overall pick along with many other picks. We trade for Deshaun Watson, get him with the Jets. And Jack, who's been a guy that's been very vocal about Deshaun Watson getting to the Jets?
I would believe it would be Richard Sherman.
Yeah, and since he's very vocal, get him with the Jets too. Sign Richard Sherman. We need some secondary help. So I'd sign Richard Sherman. I'd also go out and sign Allen Robinson. Get that number one wide receiver who has been plagued with bad quarterback play in Chicago. And another guy, a slept-on signing. Let's be honest, Chris Herndon has been a disappointment. With Robert Saleh here and Mike LaFleur as the OC, we're probably going to have a run-oriented offense, whether it's with Deshaun Watson or not. So who would be a perfect tight end for that system? I think Mo Alley Cox, a tight end who can block really well and who also has shown the ability to be a pretty good pass catcher. I'd sign him. I'd also sign James White to be a receiving back in the backfield. And I'd also sign either one of these three guys. Ryan Kerrigan to be the net edge rusher, Yannick Ngakoue, or Joe Thuney, because we need a guard badly. I'd sign them. So my dream offseason in free agency would be getting Deshaun Watson, Richard Sherman, Allen Robinson, Mo Alley Cox, and Joe Thuney, and also an edge rusher. And if we don't trade for Watson, I'd do everything that I just said we do, but I draft Trey Lance with the second overall pick. I know that's a hot take, but I'm really high on Trey Lance, and I draft Trey Lance with the second overall pick. In terms of our free agents, Brashard Perriman's a free agent, Brian Poole, Bradley McDougall, Jordan Jenkins, Neville Hewitt, Patrick Onwuasor, Marcus May, Flacco, Matthias Fairley, Frank Gore, Pat Elflein, Arthur Millette, Terrell Basham, and Frankie Louvu. For me, I think I'd re-sign Brian Poole. I wouldn't re-sign Jordan Jenkins because I think we're going to move our defensive scheme and he doesn't fit in a 4-3. So I'd re-sign Brian Poole, Marcus May, and that's about it. Everybody else can go. Outside of Brian Poole and Marcus May, everybody else can go. And then in the draft, I mean, I think if we don't get a tight end in free agency, I draft Brevin Jordan out of Miami. I think he's a very good tight end. Of course, in the first round, I already said I'd draft Trey Lance if we do have that pick. And also, I think some people to look out for, Justin Ross out of Clemson, the wide receiver. He's really good. And Jalen Phillips, an edge rusher out of Miami, who's freakishly athletic and can slide to the second round of the draft. I'd go with those guys. And if we need a guard, I'd go with probably Elijah Vera Tucker or White Davis out of Ohio State just to fill in those gaps. But that's my dream scenario for the Jets offseason. We need a wide receiver. We need a running back. We need a tight end. We need secondary help. We need an edge rusher. We need a lot of positions, but I think we start with those building blocks.
Yeah, and I'll start in the same exact place you did. I feel like the can't-miss move this offseason is trading for Deshaun Watson. He is a game-changing talent. He's a top-3 quarterback in the league, and I know a lot of people are saying, well, what's the difference between him playing for the Texans and playing for the Jets? If you trade, whatever you have to give up to get him, they still aren't going to have the talent there. First of all, the Jets are already more talented in my eyes than the Houston Texans were last year. Second of all, they have the second most cap space in the NFL, which I'm going to get into. And even with whatever they have to give up to get Deshaun Watson, thanks to the Jamal Adams trade, their draft capital is not going to take that big of a hit depending on what the value of Deshaun Watson is going to be. But I think the fact that we have, or the Jets have, I should say, the second overall pick is going to be huge in a potential trade for Deshaun Watson because the Texans can take the second overall pick and draft their guy. If they trade with the Dolphins and get the number 3 pick and they don't believe in Tua, they have to wait on somebody else picking at 2, the Jets, who need a quarterback, and they're left with the scrap heap of whoever the Jets don't want. And maybe their guy is Zach Wilson and the Jets get him at 2. So I feel like that number 2 pick has incredible value. It's almost like a number 1 pick because we all know who's going number one, and that pick is untouchable. It's going to be Trevor Lawrence. So the number 2 pick is essentially the number 1 pick this year with the rest of the field, because Trevor Lawrence is in a different world. That's not even on the table. So I feel like that pick is super valuable. So I think you give up a first round pick this year, next year, and 2023, and some later round picks, maybe throw in Sam Darnold if they want him, get that deal done, and hopefully keep that later first round pick this year, because I think there are some targets out there for the Jets. You talked about potential free agents this year that are leaving. I would say, like you mentioned, the big 2 signings would be Brian Poole. I would bring him back. He's been a great slot corner for us the past 2 seasons, one of the better ones in the league. And Marcus May. I think he's been a super underrated safety, and he was great for us this year. He was our best defensive player. Toss up with Quinnen Williams, but he was our best player in the secondary by far. I do think they could use another cornerback, which personally I would address through the draft. And speaking about the draft, with that late first round pick, which I hope they would keep in a deal for Deshaun Watson, I think there are a couple names to look out for. One, I would say J.C. Horn would be a nice pick. He's had a great season in college football, and I feel like he would be a great addition to that Jets secondary, still trying to rebuild that. I know Bryce Love came on late and had a solid season, but J.C. Horn out of South Carolina, I believe, would be a nice pickup. Some other guys that could or couldn't be on the board, Gregory Rousseau, however you pronounce his name. I've heard he's sliding back in the draft a little bit. He's a crazy raw talent, and if you could get him in as your edge rusher, and you get him in the building with Robert Saleh, I feel like that would be a good pick to fill that hole at edge rusher. And then also some guards. You mentioned Wyatt Davis and Ali Vera Tucker, however you pronounce his name. I feel like those 2 guys would be good targets at that pick. But that 23rd pick could be very instrumental in filling a big hole with a day 1 starter. So that'll be an interesting pick. A name I want them to look at late, Dwayne Eskridge out of Western Michigan, I believe. Yeah, out of Western Michigan. He's been a slept-on receiver in this class, and I feel like he can slide into one of the later rounds. And with our need at receiver, I feel like he could be a good guy to bring in with a later round draft pick. And we have a bunch of draft capital, so that would be an interesting name to look at. Getting to free agency. They have all the money in the world that you could possibly imagine. I would say a couple names to look out for. First things first, the wide receiver position has to be addressed. The big names, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Kenny Golladay, those should be the 3 names that they are mainly looking at. Corey Davis could also be in the mix, maybe a guy like Curtis Samuel, but I have my eyes set on one of those main 3 guys personally. I think that would be a game changer. Getting one of those 3 with Deshaun Watson would totally turn around this offense. Moving to the offensive line, I feel like there's still a hole at that guard spot. So whether it's Joe Thuney or Brandon Scherf, although I think Scherf will stay in Washington, one of those 2 guys I feel like would really solidify that offensive line. And then you draft another guard and you have a line pretty much set for the next 5 or so years. So I feel like one of those 2 guys would be a great pickup. Then moving to the defensive side of the ball, edge rusher. If you don't address it in the draft, you have to address it in free agency. And it's a great year for the edge rusher position. One name I think they can look at is Romeo Okwara from the Lions. We talked about him before. He had a good season. It remains to be seen if it was a breakout type year or just an outlier in a contract season. But he's a guy that you could bring in. Trey Hendrickson is another free agent from the Saints. He had a huge season, and the Saints are in a terrible money situation, so I don't think he'll end up back there. But edge rusher is another position that needs to be addressed. And then just filling out the holes. I think they'll end up bringing back a couple of those potential free agents that they're losing this offseason just to fill out the roster. But the big name guys I would look at would be the receivers, the big 3 of those top receivers. The offensive line, I feel like those 2 guys in Joe Thuney and Brandon Scherf would be main targets. The edge rusher, there are so many names. I could keep going on. Bud Dupree is another one, but there are so many. Leonard Floyd, filling that hole is huge. And then bringing in Deshaun Watson. I think that move would really set us ahead tenfold in our rebuild. So, you make those moves and you could look at maybe contending for a playoff spot.
For me, I wouldn't bring in Leonard Floyd because I think he's a 3-4 outside linebacker. I think we're going to change our scheme to a 4-3. At least I think we should, because we should move Quentin Williams back to his natural position, and we can have Fadakazi and Quentin Williams at the interior of the defensive line at those two DT positions. You put John Franklin Myers on the outside and then complement him with somebody else. So I don't think Leonard Floyd would fit in that scheme, nor would I think Bud Dupree would fit because I think he's a 3-4 outside linebacker too. But for me, I think we all know that Sam Darnold is not coming back to the Jets. At least I don't think so. Robert Saleh didn't commit to him. And if you don't commit to a quarterback, it's because he's pretty much gone. Let's just be honest. That's what's going to happen. So if we don't go the route of trading Deshaun Watson, which it feels like the Texans are very stingy about that and they might not buck, I'd draft Trey Lance. For me, I think Zach Wilson, he's very good. He has a lot of talent, but I'm still worried about his frame at the next level. He's very skinny, and I think if he takes a big hit, he can get hurt. When we talk about Justin Fields, I think he stares down his number one wide receiver way too often. Trey Lance is like the happy medium for me. He has all the physical tools. He didn't throw in interceptions in 2019, so his decision-making is on par, even though it was against lower competition. And I think in a right system, Trey Lance can really flourish, and people are sleeping on Trey Lance because of the competition he played, and he didn't play the entire 2020 season, so he's kind of going under the radar. But I think he is the gem outside of Trevor Lawrence in this quarterback draft class.
Yeah, if it was me and the Jets don't trade for Deshaun Watson, I would take Zach Wilson at 2. I would stay away from Justin Fields. I think you kind of hit on it. I think he's a one-read quarterback, so I feel like he needs a lot of work to make it work at the next level, and I think he can get there, but I don't think he's the right guy for the Jets. I feel like Zach Wilson would make more sense. He said it himself. He's a perfect fit for a Shanahan-type 49ers offense, which is what I think is going to be brought over here to the Jets. And maybe they do stick with Sam Darnold because I feel like he's another guy that would fit in that 49ers type offense. So there are a bunch of different directions they can go in. If they keep Sam Darnold, they could trade back and maybe get a guy like Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle or one of those top 3 receivers in the draft. I also think they need to address the hole at running back. Who do they really have at that position next year? LaMichael Pirine will be the number 1 on the depth chart going into next year. So if they get out of running back, but I don't think they should splurge on one like an Aaron Jones. I feel like a more underrated option would be the way to go. There are so many names out there. Even a guy like Leonard Fournette, maybe coming off a solid season with the Buccaneers. I don't think he would command as much money as one of those top guys. But I feel like there are a bunch of running back names to look at. And another guy you mentioned, I forgot to, Richard Sherman. He's essentially put the pen to the paper with the way he's talked about Robert Saleh, getting him in as not only a viable cornerback option, but a perfect leader to put in that defensive room and the cornerback room with some young talent. I know Bryce Love, he had a great job. Bryce Hall had a great season last year towards the end of the year. So you could get him in there with Richard Sherman. It'd be a perfect little mentorship. So I feel like he would be a great fit, but there is a bunch of different when you're a team like the Jets, who definitely have holes at multiple positions and the draft capital and the money they have, there are so many different directions they could go in. But I feel like the can't miss move would be trading for Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I think so as well. But when we talk about free agency, I think we can at max sign 2, maybe 3 big name free agents. If we do that, I think it's Allen Robinson and Joe Thuney. Those are the 2 guys that I'd go with. And when talking about our cap space and our cap situation, I think that we can splurge on free agency, but I don't think that we should. And you talked about the running back position. We don't want this to be another Le'Veon Bell situation where we go and sign Aaron Jones. So we know that we can get running backs for cheap, whether that's bringing in a Matt Breida, who didn't get to play much in Miami, whether that's bringing in a Tevin Coleman, who's a free agent as well. There are a lot of options at the running back position. Mike Davis, James White, just to name a few. So the Jets don't really have to try to get a cornerstone running back. We can have a running back by committee system, which is what Shanahan does regardless.
Yeah, and I don't think that splurging for a running back is the recipe for success anywhere in the NFL. I feel like the one outlier I would say is the Titans, where they've paid Derrick Henry, and he really has been that dude in Tennessee. But even when you look at the top teams in the NFL, who is paying a running back big money, I just don't think it's the right way to go about things. And I don't think it's the right way for the Jets to go about it. You said it perfectly. They have room for 2 or 3 big name signings. One, I would go for a wide receiver because there are so many good options out there. You really can't miss. And then two, I feel like the guard position is one that I would rather an NFL veteran rather than throwing a rookie into the fire, or throwing 2 rookies into the fire, I should say, because they're really looking to fill 2 guard spots this offseason. So if you could get one of them with a solidified NFL veteran, I feel like that would be the right way to go. Edge rusher, I would feel more comfortable taking in the draft. Cornerback, I feel like you can get a little bit cheaper and through the draft. So wide receiver and guard would be the 2 positions I would heavily target in free agency.